Take a look at this Saul Leiter photograph. Leiter is out there just after a blizzard taking photographs. If you or I had been standing on that corner, we would probably have looked at the weather and gone, yeah, I'm just going to pack this in today. But Leiter come back with an amazing photograph. And it is a photograph that is good enough to hang alongside the rest of his work in MoMA. And it has been made in some of the worst conditions imaginable for photography. Here's the problem that most photographers have with bad weather. They think that automatically equals bad photographs because we go out and we try to photograph the weather. But Saul is doing something different to make this seemingly atrocious weather his secret weapon. I'll show you what I mean. Let's take the snow away from that photograph. It's not that the picture falls apart necessarily, but it lacks a certain something. Put the snow back and look what happens. A whole different photograph emerges. So it's not that necessarily that the bad weather is the problem that we think it is. It's just we don't use it the way that Saul Leiter is using it, which is as a tool. But once we understand how he's using that weather, the snow and the rain and the condensation, all that sort of stuff, we start to see it everywhere in his work. And then we can learn from that and realize that to take great photographs, we don't need to wait for these so-called perfect conditions. And this all starts with a Japanese aesthetic, ukiyo-e, which basically means pictures of a floating world. It is the aesthetic that you see in those Japanese woodblock prints and the paintings. You're familiar with them when you sort of see them. And Saul Leiter, because he was a painter as well, was very interested in this kind of aesthetic, and he kept some of these prints in his studio. And what that matters for us is that he is using that aesthetic to turn those awful blizzardy conditions, the rain, all that kind of stuff, into the very thing that makes his photographs stand out. So how is he doing this? When ukiyo-e, composition is arranged in a flat surface. And what kind of weather helps create a flat surface? I think the answer we're kind of seeing already, yeah, it's snow. Even if you've never experienced snow in your life, you know what it does. It covers everything in a blanket of white. Obviously, a lot of people photograph snow, but it's usually after it's settled in a bucolic, lovely looking landscape and stuff. But Saul's out there, he's photographing. What is that snow doing to this city? It is landing on everything. It is making the whole city feel flat. All of a sudden, that snow creates a one-dimensional space because everything is basically the same tone. It is so obvious when you compare his work side by side with the woodcuts and what he's doing. Do you know what? Most people, it's snow, I'm not going to go outside, I'm going to wrap up, have a hot chocolate and something. And we see a problem. But Saul Leiter's looked at it and he has gone, aha, that aesthetic that I love so much, that's the perfect thing that I need. He's also using a lens choice to flatten the world. Now, while street photographers of the day, you have people like Henri Cartier-Bresson, they are using standard like 50mm lenses. And Saul said like he likes a 50mm lens, and that's all cool. But those lenses tend to put us into the environment. The photographs that I love of Saul's are the ones where it just feels like this is a scene, this is a painting that we are seeing from afar, that everything's been flattened. That long lens is compressing everything. It is pulling things in the distance closer to us. It's putting us on that flat plane. If you live somewhere where there's snow or there's sand or any sort of universal surface that softens edges and flattens everything out, then try this. See what happens when you don't treat the snow or the sand or anything as a surface, as an actual subject, as a thing, but instead a blank canvas to be able to mimic in your lens the canvas that is in front of a painter before they put anything onto it, and use it to isolate the subject, a color, the figure, things that would otherwise be lost in the photographs. Something else that Saul uses, and that is shadow. This photograph here. This is, you first read this image. When you look at it, you think, this is like a heavy skyline, cutting across with this moody thing. But then you realize it's not a skyline at all. It is the shadow of an awning. None of this is an accident. This is the painter inside of Saul Leiter deciding that that single dark shape is enough to carry the whole top of the frame. It's that aesthetic, drawing inspirations from outside photography and bringing them in, and in doing so, creating work that absolutely stands out because it is different. It's not drawing its inspiration from other photographers. Saul is learning this by looking, by understanding what is in those Japanese wood prints. And that you can build this skill too. When you look at a photograph, seeing what's actually working in it and then applying it to your own. It's the whole idea behind the visual primer that I've put together in the description below. Snow wasn't the only half of Saul's weather magic, his toolbox, because there's another kind of bad day that he loved just as much. And we've talked about Japanese woodcuts, but there is another name that we could associate with Leiter. Now, there's a group of French painters that were loosely called the Nabi, and they had a manifesto, a picture. Before it is a horse or a noodle, some anecdote is essentially a flat surface with colors assembled in a certain order. Now, Leiter felt that connection. You can see it in his own paintings. And that's one thing to do with a paintbrush and a blank canvas. But how does a photographer who loves this idea recreate those blocks of color in a photograph? Is there a kind of bad weather that helps? Oh, yeah, it's the rain. Once again, if we're looking and it's raining, it's like, whoa, we go like, our camera's going to get wet. And if we do go out, then we try and photograph the rain. But Saul isn't out there photographing the rain. He is using it as a tool, the thing that makes the colors of a simplified scene run, bleed, become melted pieces of color on the canvas of that street. And that's where it gets beautiful. Now, Saul's summer work, it's dry and it's sunny. There's no real hardcore weather at all. It is still great because he understands, the composition and all the basic principles that he's applying in the rain. But when the weather comes in, the rain and the snow and the huddled figures protecting themselves, that's when his work explodes. That's when I think his work just goes to a completely another level. You've most likely seen this photograph of a man through a window, framed by condensation. But look what's holding all of this together. Take away the yellow van in the background, and the photograph loses that little splash of something. Put it back, and then look at the man himself. He starts out fairly structured at the top, but by the time we reach his legs, there's simply an impression of some legs. They're a blurry, wet, melted sort of mess. And you see this again and again in Saul's work. I have been using some generative AI to help us see the difference, to put visual concepts into a format that we can actually see. But in this book, Saul Leiter at Centenary, and we have on this page the very photograph that we've been talking about. And then the next page, same scene. It is the same scene, but a woman without the truck. It is completely different photograph. It's not nearly as great as the one with the yellow truck because it's missing some of those elements. So we're not just out there photographing the weather or the rain or the snow or something. We are still having to think, as Saul is doing, about what works here. It's about asking what the weather can actually offer us that makes those photographs come alive. What's the tool that we have in front of us? We shouldn't just complain about the conditions. We should learn to do something with them. You can't just go out and photograph in the snow and say, well, my work is brilliant and all that kind of stuff. It does need effort. And when people look at Saul's work, There's a word that crops up every now and again. It's like lucky. How many times must he have stood in a certain place to get a certain shot? And I think it's worth remembering at this point. When we look at any famous photographer, this is a book called A Centenary. This is not Saul Leiter's best pictures from this weekend, right? This is his whole career boiled down to not even a few hundred frames. It's his very best work. We don't see the mistakes. We don't see the trial and the error. When you look at his body of work, you see the same DNA from the very early days developing. And then it gets to a point where I think he has a sixth sense, an understanding how certain scenes are going to play out. And so by the time events like that happen, by the time these photographs do come together, people like Saul Leiter, they're prepared for them. I think there's also another aspect with this. It's like when we talk about, bad weather and stuff like that, I, I feel like a lot of photographers go, well, it's because the light isn't great. We are used to thinking about conditions as the light. The golden hour is all about the light. We need to stop thinking about the light. I don't feel like Saul is going off in the snow, in the rain, looking for the light. He's looking for what the weather is doing. But there is still one deeper thing. As you've noticed, even on a bright sunny day, Saul's photographs still have that same pull. The weather isn't creating his eyes. As I said, it's sort of supercharging what he had. And that eye comes from outside of photography. Now, Saul talked about the idea that there's something inside all of us that strives for a kind of order. And of course, we all have a different perspective. Photography is a medium that keeps being changed by people who come from somewhere else. Like Saul Leiter, Cartier-Bresson trained as a painter. Ansel Adams, he was a concert pianist. And this is what matters for you and I watching this video. Now, you might think that your background, say in IT, there's a million miles from any of this creativity. But think about this. That order, that structure that Saul is looking at, that he is putting into his own words, and that's what you can bring in to your photography. That's your superpower. It may not feel like it, that you're not organizing numbers on a spreadsheet or wires or cables or any of that kind of stuff. You are organizing lines, shapes, color, patterns, aligning them in the way that a painter might do. So the question to take away from all of this is not, how do I shoot in the rain? What is it that my outside eye can bring in a way that is unique? As I said, there is a primer in the description box which will help you learn the language of photography to help you bring order to that chaos. So thank you ever so much, and I'll see you again soon. Cheerio.